in the freezing cold winter after taking the blame for someone else. I held his ashes in my arms and went to the military district to beg my husband, the regiment commander, to give us justice. Only to discover that he had already held a wedding banquet with his comrade's widow, Rachel. Even more shocking, Rachel's son was the very culprit who had paid for a scapegoat, and it was because of him that my son was wrongly punished. That boy assumed my son's identity, got into college, and married a wife, while my child was reduced to a patch of yellow earth in the ground. I threatened my husband with death, begging him to give our son justice. But he simply frowned and scolded me for being unreasonable. He's already dead. That's a fact that can't be changed. If you keep this quiet, Rachel and I are willing to give you $100 as compensation. I can't ruin Kevin's future over someone who's already gone. In total despair, I drank poison and killed myself at my son's grave. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day before my son was about to be framed. This time, I took my father's military service medal, brought my son, and knelt in front of the military district's gates, crying my heart out and begging the organization to stand up for us. The first thing I did after coming back was enroll my son, Ethan, in the National Seed Program and got the political vetting certificate approved. The next day, I went directly to a journalist from the provincial newspaper and exposed the fact that Brian Sanders, my husband, was keeping 2 women in military housing. Because this affected the reputation of military personnel, the story made the front page headlines. That very afternoon, an enraged Brian showed up. In my previous life, I had knelt in front of the military district for 3 days and still never saw him. It wasn't until I slit my wrists in public and was hospitalized that he finally agreed to meet me once. But in this life, he came straight to me. The moment he saw me, he slapped me across the face. "You ignorant hick," he shouted. "Do you have any idea how badly this will affect my future?" When Ethan saw me get hit, he immediately picked up a wooden stick and stood in front of me, glaring fiercely at Brian. Watching the father and son face off, Rachel's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, though she put on a pitiful face and said, "Sister, it's all my fault. If you want to blame someone, blame me. My husband is innocent. Please forgive him, won't you?" I ignored her manipulative act and, holding my stinging cheek, questioned Brian word by word. "Yesterday, the police came to our house trying to arrest Ethan for hooliganism. Did that have anything to do with you?" My questions startled both Brian and Rachel. They had been very discreet in framing Ethan for Kevin's crime. How could I have found out? But seeing the panic and guilt flash across their faces, I understood everything. "He's your own son. Even wild animals don't harm their young. How could you be this heartless?" I demanded again and again, pushing Brian to the edge and making him lose face. Annoyed, he shouted, "He's not as good a student as Kevin. So what if he takes the blame for him? What, you want me to watch Kevin die? Besides, nothing even happened to him. What more do you want?" His words broke my heart. So he knew my son would die if he took the blame. But still, he made that decision so easily. It reminded me of his excuses from my past life. Back then, Rachel's husband had already died in action. She was a battlefield nurse and fell in love with Brian while caring for him during his recovery. At the time, she was even pregnant with his fallen comrade's child. I didn't think twice. I treated her like my own sister. I was the one who carried her to the hospital when she gave birth. During her postpartum confinement, I made her every meal. Because she was thin and weak, she couldn't produce enough milk, so Kevin was raised on my breast milk. You could say I was the one who raised him. Never did I think that my one act of kindness would ultimately cost my own son his life. After leaving the military district, I went home and even reminded Brian to take good care of Rachel and her child. But within 6 months, his letters became fewer and farther between. Eventually, the military allowance stopped altogether. I thought he was just too busy with military affairs. Even when Ethan and I were eating dry, tasteless food at home, I never asked him for money. But when I brought my son's ashes to find him, I discovered that he had already built a small villa for Rachel inside the military compound. They were living in luxury. And Kevin even had the money to take piano lessons. The moment Brian saw me, he panicked and warned, "Rachel and I are now seen as the perfect couple by everyone. If you don't want to be labeled the homewrecker, you'd better leave. For the sake of clearing Ethan's name, I swallowed my sorrow and begged him to get justice for our son. To appease me, he agreed on the surface and let me stay on as a housekeeper, doing all the household chores. But while cleaning, I accidentally overheard their conversation. "Babe, are you sure this won't get exposed?" "Don't worry. I handled the scapegoat matter myself. There's no way she'll find out." I felt like I had fallen into an abyss of ice, so it was her. She was the one who had personally arranged for my son to be sacrificed. I stormed forward, grabbed her collar, and furiously confronted her, but Brian impatiently shoved me to the ground. "Now that you know, fine. I won't hide it anymore. Take this $100 and let's call it even." It was my own foolish kindness that cost Ethan his life. And in the end, I lost all hope and chose to die. The unwillingness and despair from my past life, I could still feel it just as deeply in this one. But now, all I wanted was justice. I didn't care to entangle myself with them any further. Just as I was about to speak from the heart, I heard Ethan's panicked, angry shouting from inside the house. I rushed in and found that his file had been torn open. He was kneeling on the floor, desperately trying to tape the documents back together, but it was no use. Right next to him stood the culprit, Kevin, with his hands casually stuffed in his pockets, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world. Bookmark. Before I could even question Kevin about why he'd done such a disgusting thing, Brian Sanders' scolding voice came crashing down on me. So this is where Ethan's file went. No wonder I couldn't find it in the system. Why did you enroll him in the National Seed Program? Did I ever give my permission? I laughed coldly inside. If I hadn't secured my son's future in time, he would have already been thrown into prison as someone else's scapegoat. I walked up to Kevin and, using all my strength, slapped him across the face. "You're a high school student. Don't tell me you don't understand the consequences of tearing open a file like that. Why would you do something so cruel and harmful to someone else's future?" Seeing what I did, Rachel screamed sharply and rushed forward, checking the mark on Kevin's face with urgency. Kevin looked at me like a venomous snake, his eyes full of cold malice. "Yeah, I know what'll happen. It just means Ethan won't be able to go to college or join that program anymore. So what?" Watching him show not an ounce of remorse, I slapped him again. "If your parents can't teach you how to be a decent human being, then I will." At that, Brian grabbed Ethan's arm and dislocated it, then threw him violently to the floor. The living room still had a burning charcoal brazier for warmth, and Ethan landed right on top of the hot coals. His back immediately blistered and scorched. "Jenny, don't mistake my kindness for weakness," Brian snarled. "Everything in this house belongs to me, including that boy's life. If I want to take it back, I don't need your permission. If you had been smarter, I would have let you stay as the main wife. But clearly, you can't get along with Rachel and Kevin. Since that's the case, stay in the countryside and reflect on yourself. When you've figured it out, maybe then I'll give you a proper title." Hearing his twisted words, I felt nothing but numbness. Right now, I only wanted to get Ethan to the hospital as fast as possible. As soon as we arrived, the doctor took one look at Ethan's back and immediately rushed him into surgery. When it was over, the doctor came out with a scolding look. If the burns had been any worse, we would have had to graft new skin. His words filled me with silent fury, but Ethan still tried to smile through the pain. "Mom, don't cry. It doesn't really hurt. I'm the one who made you fight with Dad. It's all my fault. I won't argue anymore. I'm willing to go apologize to Kevin if it'll make Dad stop being so cold to you." His words filled my chest with a wave of sorrow. He always worried that he was ruining my life, that I'd lose a better future because of him. But he still didn't know the truth, that in our last life, he was killed by his own biological father. I remembered how, before he was taken to prison, he gripped my hand so tightly and asked, "Mom, why hasn't Dad come to see me, even once? Don't worry about me anymore. Live your life well. I'll repay you in my next life." As I listened to him try so hard to comfort me, I wrapped my arms around his frail little body and broke down crying. But in my heart, I made a silent vow. "Ethan, don't be afraid. Mom will make sure you get the justice you deserve." That night when we returned home, we found ourselves locked out. The cold wind pierced through my cotton coat, and no matter how hard I banged on the door, there was no response from inside. Ethan had already developed a high fever, his whole body burning hot to the touch. I knelt at the door and banged my forehead on the frame, begging, "Please let us in. Ethan's sick. He can't handle the cold." Suddenly, the lights inside flicked on. Just as I let hope rise in my chest, I heard a woman's breathy moans. "Babe, stop, someone's outside." "So what?" Brian's voice followed. "Let them hear. It'll teach them a lesson. Come here, give me a kiss." Listening to the obscene sounds of their lovemaking behind the door, I felt my whole body go cold. My despair only deepened. All I could do was take off my cotton coat and wrap it tightly around Ethan, who was shivering uncontrollably. Snow began to fall from the sky, but the door never opened. Inside, the sounds of panting and moaning from their lovemaking came in waves, one after another, while outside we could only grit our teeth and endure it. We had no money left to stay at a hospital or even rent a room at a guest house. And in the village, no one dared take us in. Everyone feared Brian Sanders and his influence. By midday the next day, just when I thought my body had frozen stiff, the door slowly creaked open. Rachel stood there, her face flushed with satisfaction. She looked surprised and called out in a fake sweet voice, "Oh, when did you get here, Jenny? Why didn't you knock? My husband kept me up all night. I didn't hear a thing." I ignored her mockery. I helped Ethan inside and laid him down on the bed, then rushed into the house. I had saved money for years, hoping to give Ethan a chance at college, but the place was a mess. Obviously, someone had rifled through everything. I stared at the overturned closet with a sinking feeling. Sure enough, the money I had hidden was gone. "Where's my money?" I demanded. Rachel answered calmly, even smugly. "Brian was gone for years. It was the neighbors who helped keep this house running. That money? We used it to thank them." Then she shot me a look full of disdain. "You're really that stingy, huh? Still thinking about that little bit of cash? Honestly, acting so petty. No wonder people look down on you." Her words made my head spin. That money was earned acre by acre, selling grain bit by bit. It was meant for Ethan's education, and now it was all gone. Rachel walked away, proud and pleased with herself. I forced myself to calm down and opened a hidden compartment in the closet. Inside, the military medals were still there, well preserved. I let out a breath of relief. These medals were our family's greatest treasure, and my last leverage for justice. What Brian didn't know was that I was never just some ignorant countrywoman. My father had served in combat and earned multiple first-class medals of merit. He didn't stay in the military. He chose to return home and farm the land. I never told anyone about those medals because, on his deathbed, he made me promise never to use them to trouble the organization. That's why in my past life, even when Ethan was dying, I never once considered using those medals. But in this life, all I wanted was justice. I carefully packed the medals, sold the only piece of jewelry my mother left me, and scraped together enough money to cover Ethan's medical treatment and the train fare to the military district. Once Ethan recovered, we boarded the train together and made our way to the base. When we arrived, I told the guard I wanted to speak with Brian Sanders' superior. The guard looked me up and down with disdain and sneered. "Where'd you crawl out from? Some backwater swamp? Who do you think you are, asking to see our commander's boss? You're not here to beg for money, are you?" I had faced this same ridicule in my past life. Back then, I told them directly I was Brian's wife and even showed them our marriage certificate, but it didn't matter. To them, Rachel was the commander's real wife, and I was just some troublemaker with no background. In that life, I endured every insult just for a chance to see Brian. But this time, I wouldn't. I laid down my coat on the ground slowly and deliberately. Then I took out each military medal one by one and arranged them neatly. When I looked up again, the guard's face had gone pale. "Do I qualify to see Brian Sanders' superior now?" I asked coldly. "Please wait here," he stammered and quickly made a call. It wasn't long before several elderly men arrived in a rush. Their olive green uniforms and silver hair made my eyes sting. It felt like I was seeing my father again, standing tall and proud in his youth. Clutching the medals to my chest, I dropped to my knees and sobbed uncontrollably. "Please," I cried, "please give my son and me a chance to survive." The man in front reached out immediately and gently helped me to my feet. He looked down at my tattered clothes and the frostbite on my hands. Then his eyes fell on the familiar metals. His voice caught in his throat. "I served with your father. You're the daughter of a decorated hero." He straightened up and looked me in the eyes. "Comrade, whatever injustice you've suffered, tell me everything. I'll see that you get justice." Hearing those long-lost words of concern, my tears flowed again. I sobbed uncontrollably, but still managed to stammer out the hardships we'd endured over the years. When they heard that my husband, a regimental commander, had hidden the fact that he was keeping 2 women, the officials were furious, slapping their thighs in anger. And when they learned that he had sacrificed his own biological child's future for the sake of his stepson, one of the leaders couldn't hold back and cursed aloud, "What a beast!" But I wasn't done. I rolled up my pant leg and revealed my deformed shin bone. Back when Brian Sanders was injured on a mission and presumed dead, no one believed he had survived. I was the one who carried him out from a pile of corpses. Because of that, my leg suffered a permanent fracture. After decades of hard labor, the injury had worsened into a grotesque condition. Then, I lifted Ethan's shirt. In addition to the burns, his body bore scars from fighting with local thugs in the village. The lead official looked at us with eyes full of pain. He wiped his tears and gently held my hand. "Comrade," he said warmly, "the organization understands your suffering now. Whatever you need, speak freely. We'll stand behind you." "I want the organization to thoroughly investigate Brian Sanders and Kevin for their crimes," I said firmly. "They must face the law, and I want a divorce." My request was simple but resolute. No sooner had I spoken than Brian's voice thundered into the room. He had rushed there upon hearing the news. "You bitch! What nonsense are you spewing? Hurry up and explain everything to the leaders." He raised his hand, clearly intending to strike me, but a leader in plain clothes kicked him straight to the floor. "Commander Sanders," he barked, "in front of all these people, you dare raise a hand against a hero's daughter? What do you take us for, props?" Brian panicked. His eyes flicked to me in disbelief. You're the daughter of a decorated war hero?" I didn't respond with words. Instead, I lifted the military medals in my hands. Though the yellowed metal was pitted with age, it still gleamed fiercely in the sunlight, bright enough to blind him. One of my father's comrades stepped forward with a cold scoff and began explaining each medal's origin one by one. "This one," he said, "was awarded during routine training. Her father lost an arm protecting a young soldier who stepped on a landmine. This one," he pointed, "was from the war, where he was injured while blowing up an enemy aircraft. And this one," he added, "was given for protecting civilians' property during a natural disaster." Each account was heavier than the last. Brian's face grew paler with every word, until he began to shake. He looked at me with bitter regret in his eyes, clearly blaming me for not revealing my background sooner. If he had known, he wouldn't have chosen Rachel just to advance his career. Rachel was equally stunned. In her eyes, I had always been a simple, uneducated village woman who got lucky by marrying Brian and becoming an officer's wife. If she had known my true identity, she would have chosen someone else entirely, someone with even higher status. But her ambitions didn't matter anymore. The real problem now was Kevin's crime, which could no longer be swept under the rug. Realizing this, she tried to seize control of the situation. She collapsed to her knees in tears and pleaded with the officials, "Please help me too. When I married Brian, I didn't know he was still married to his wife. I was tricked. And when my son made a mistake, he wanted to turn himself in. It was Brian who convinced him to find a scapegoat. And he was the one who insisted Ethan should take the fall. My son is innocent." Her accusations shocked Brian, who stared at her as if she were a stranger. It had been his idea to let Ethan take the blame, and it was Rachel who pushed for it. Now she was throwing him under the bus? He looked anxiously at the officials and raised his right hand in a panic. "I swear on my honor as a soldier, I never did anything, except the matter of keeping a second wife." Watching them tear each other apart like rabid dogs, I couldn't help but laugh. This was just the beginning. In my past life, their family had built their happiness on my and Ethan's pain. In this life, I would return every bit of that, suffering. Hearing me laugh, Brian seemed to catch a glimmer of hope and turned to me. pleading, "Jenny, we've been husband and wife. Please, explain to the leaders. I really just lost my way for a moment. I promise I'll treat you and Ethan well from now on. Let's be a family again." But before I could say a word, Ethan stepped forward and spat right in his face. "You call us a family?" he snapped. "Growing up, I only had my mom, never a father." I gently patted Ethan's hand to calm him down, then turned and begged the military officers to punish them severely. Once I made my stance clear, the leadership decided to handle the matter impartially. Because of the seriousness of the issues involved, a special investigative team was formed by the military district to look into the case personally. During the investigation, Ethan and I were temporarily placed in housing inside the military family compound, while Brian, Rachel, and Kevin were all taken into custody. That same afternoon, I received my divorce certificate. From that point on, I had nothing to do with Brian Sanders ever again. Additionally, the issue with Ethan's student file was quickly resolved. Now that his life was no longer at risk, he didn't have to join the National Seed program. He could take the regular college entrance exam instead. But even so, Ethan still chose to go to the Seed program. When I asked him why he was so determined, he looked at me with eyes brighter than I had ever seen. "Mom," he said, "I've spent my whole life trapped in a village. I want to see more of this great country. And if I go through the Seed program and then take the college exam, I'll have more career choices later on. I want to make you proud. I want to become your strength." Looking at the seriousness on his young face, my heart ached. I had held him back. I gently touched his still thin but upright back and nodded in agreement. After sending him off on the train to Xinjiang, I contacted the publicity department of the military district. I told them our story, and it quickly spread throughout the base. Our story, mine, Ethan's, and even Brian's, became widely known. Because I was once a military wife, the daughter of a decorated war hero and a victim, people were genuinely interested in my experience. I was recruited by the publicity department and began working as an editor. I wrote articles about everything I had endured, and they were published across the military's media network. Soon, the whole district was talking about our story. When I went to the market to buy vegetables, I could hear women loudly scolding their sons and daughters using Brian and Rachel as examples. "Did you read about that scumbag couple in the papers? I'm telling you, you better grow up honest and decent. If I ever find out you've done something shameful, I won't wait for the authorities. I'll take care of it myself." Even the military district school read the article and began investigating Kevin's behavior. What they uncovered infuriated the school administrators. Kevin had been using his father's rank as regimental commander to bully students, extorting money from classmates whose families were less powerful, beating those who didn't pay up. Any girl who was even slightly attractive would get harassed. Among his victims was the child of a fallen soldier who had been both blackmailed and physically assaulted. That soldier's mother, who had remained silent out of fear for Brian's influence, finally decided to act. After reading my article, she steeled herself and brought her child, along with her late husband's first-class medal, straight to the gates of the military base, where she knelt in protest. Her act sparked widespread outrage. People were furious that the children of martyrs were being bullied in a military school. Public pressure mounted quickly, with many demanding justice from both the school and the military district. While the public outcry intensified, the investigation into Brian's family was finally completed. Kevin was convicted of crimes including hooliganism, blackmail, and paying someone to take the fall for his actions. Because he was a minor, he was sentenced to a juvenile detention center. Rachel was convicted of sabotaging a military marriage and aiding her son in framing another. She received a 5-year prison sentence. What shocked me most, though, was what happened to Brian. I don't know what promises he made to Rachel while they were in custody, but somehow, she took the blame for everything. The only charge that stuck to Brian was marrying a second wife, while still legally married to me. As a result, he was demoted from regimental commander to platoon leader, but allowed to remain in the military. However, the military ordered him to repay me the full amount of allowances he had withheld over the years. The property he had been assigned, including their house, was transferred into my name. He was also made to pay restitution to all the students Kevin had bullied. I wasn't completely satisfied, but I knew this was the best possible outcome. A man like Brian, who had climbed from a farm boy to a regimental commander, must have methods and connections I couldn't begin to imagine. I wrote a letter to Ethan to update him on the verdicts and also shared some recent news. One of my father's old comrades had introduced me to someone new, a military officer named Colonel Martin Kwan, who had taken over Brian's former post. His wife had died during childbirth, and he had remained single ever since. After hearing about my story, he personally asked the senior leadership to help connect us, and so he became my blind date. After spending some time getting to know each other, I took the initiative and invited him to my home. I made a full table of dishes. After we'd had a few rounds of drinks, I finally asked the question that had been weighing on my heart. "Do you think I was too ruthless?" I said. After all, we were husband and wife, but I completely destroyed Brian Sanders' future, and in the end, still insisted on divorcing him. I wasn't asking this out of nowhere. After people heard my story, there were those who sympathized with me, of course, but there were also some who disapproved of my actions. These days, people say it's better to tear down 10 temples than to break up one marriage. In their eyes, asking for a divorce made me a woman who didn't know her place. I worried Colonel Martin Kwan might feel the same way. He stared at me for a few seconds, then suddenly smiled. "Not at all. I think you're a remarkable woman. You raised a child all by yourself in those harsh rural conditions. And when you were wronged, you had the courage to stand up for yourself. I deeply admire that kind of woman. As soldiers, we can't always be there for our wives, so it's even more important for our partners to be strong. You're exactly the kind of person I respect." His words made my cheeks flush, but they also eased the tension in my heart. Still, I knew that if I were to remarry, I had to get Ethan's approval first. Before I could even send a telegram to ask for his opinion, Ethan had already rushed back from Xinjiang, dusty and travel-worn. The moment he laid eyes on Martin, he punched him square in the face. After all his time training on the border, Ethan was no longer the scrawny boy he used to be. But he still wasn't a match for Martin, a seasoned regimental commander. Martin gave me a calm look, signaling he had everything under control, then easily sparred with Ethan until the boy, panting and worn out, stumbled and collapsed to the ground. That was when Martin smiled and asked, "So, am I qualified to be your father now?" Ethan was still gasping for breath, but his eyes were locked on Martin with defiant determination. "I may not be strong enough now," he said, "but I'll keep training, and if I ever find out you mistreated my mom, I swear I won't go easy on you." Hearing that, Martin immediately stood upright and gave a crisp military salute. "Comrade, rest assured," he said solemnly. "I will make sure your mother is happy for the rest of her life." On the day Martin and I registered our marriage and held the wedding banquet, Brian showed up uninvited. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes and sneered at Martin. "So this is the great Colonel Kwan? Doesn't seem like your standards are too high after all, marrying the woman I threw away." The moment he insulted me, Martin didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and punched him hard in the face. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "Next time, I won't go so easy on you." Brian, bleeding from his lip, still tried to come back with another insult, but when he caught sight of my cold, unwavering gaze, he froze. Although he had only been demoted to platoon leader and hadn't become an ordinary soldier, Brian knew that his military career was effectively over. And to avoid heavier punishment, he had already promised Rachel half his assets. Add that to the money he had to pay me in backdated military stipends and the restitution owed to others, he was left penniless. He had grown used to a life of power and flattery, and now that everything was gone, he simply couldn't cope. So he set his sights on my father's military medals. "Jenny," he said, trying to sound wounded, "I treated you well when we first got married, didn't I? Why didn't you ever tell me your father was a decorated war hero? If you'd just told me from the start, none of this would have happened. This is all your fault." Looking at his pathetic, angry face, I let out a small laugh. "And how do you think you got into the army in the first place? You think it was because of your own abilities?" My words brought a stunned silence to the entire room. Brian's eyes went wide. He remembered now how the first time he applied for military service, he was rejected for not meeting the education standards. But on his second attempt, he was accepted and even assigned to a good unit. Was it possible that Mr. Zhang, the quiet old farmer missing an arm and a leg, who never even learned to read, was actually the one who helped him get in? Still not convinced, Brian stared at me, confused and unwilling to believe. So I calmly explained. After you were rejected the first time, my father saw how hard you worked to improve yourself. You didn't give up. You studied, exercised, and pushed yourself harder, and your physical condition was strong to begin with. It was my father who wrote a recommendation letter for you. In that letter, he called you the son he never had. But how did you treat his daughter? How did you treat his grandson? Look into your heart and ask yourself, do you really deserve that recommendation letter? My words left Brian completely speechless. He stumbled back a few steps, stunned, and muttered under his breath. If he helped me once, why didn't he help me all the way? If he had kept supporting me, I would have gone even further. As he spoke, he started convincing himself of it, his eyes turning red with anger. Then he yelled at me, "Your father was so good to me. Why did you betray me? Go talk to the higher-ups right now. Tell them to reinstate my position. Do it." He reached out to grab my arm, but Martin immediately stepped in and knocked him aside. Everyone present looked at Brian with nothing but contempt. I shook my head as I watched him, so pitiful and disgraced. When greed festers in a man's heart and he can't control it, even the greatest favor turns into hatred. In the end, Brian Sanders was nothing more than an ungrateful wolf. My life after marriage was peaceful and fulfilling. Martin wasn't a man of many words, but his kindness showed in everything he did. After training, he'd bring me a roasted chicken from the mess hall. On work trips, he'd return with a bouquet of roses. And I, once worn down and weathered like a woman in her 60s, began to glow again. My spirit, my face, even my eyes came back to life. One day when Martin returned from a trip, he brought unexpected news. Kevin had been beaten to death in juvenile detention. It turned out he continued bullying people in prison and got involved in gang fights. Among the group that finally retaliated were some of the very boys he had tormented in the past. They took the opportunity to make him pay with his life. Rachel, still serving her sentence, went completely insane upon hearing her son was dead. When I heard the news, I was momentarily stunned, but I didn't say much. In the end, both Rachel and Kevin had gotten exactly what they'd earned. A life for a life. That's how it should be. I never forgot that in our past life it was them who drove Ethan to his grave. As for Brian, he finally filed for retirement from the military. Everyone here knew my father or had worked with him, so Brian's reputation was completely ruined. The only chance he had left at promotion was to leave the army altogether. I heard he applied for a position in a remote town in hopes of securing some civil appointment. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. All I cared about now was my small, happy home. Just a few days ago, I received a telegram from Ethan, sent from the border region. He had met a like-minded female comrade, a doctor working with Doctors Without Borders. They met while volunteering together in Xinjiang and were now planning to get married. Knowing that he's living a complete and fulfilling life in this lifetime, the bitterness in my heart finally began to fade. In my past life, I was a timid, helpless mother, and because of that, I lost my son forever. But in this life, I finally gave both myself and my son the justice we deserve.